So, okay, just being a parent and seeing all of the crazy drug epidemic, the school shootings, the the human trafficking, just all the kind of like stuff that you think, how can people even like, how can that stuff happen? How do kids slip through the cracks in our society? Like, how is it that this stuff even happens?
Now, I worked at an alternative school, and at alternative school, I got a chance to look at hundreds of kids' files. So I did testing, we did testing on them, we looked at their histories, we did psychological testing as well as academic testing, and then we had therapists that met with people and did groups, and I worked in that setting for 5 years. The thing that you really notice in that is that kids often start a pattern of failure pretty early. They can start that failure in a lot of different ways. A large number of kids have trauma in their past. They have abuse, either physical abuse or sexual abuse, and that makes it difficult for them to be successful, right? They have two things going on. They have the ordinary school work and the ordinary life that's going on, and then they have the side thing, which is I have the abuse or this trauma in my life, and I'm trying to take care of that. It's kind of like you're in a war, but you also have to do your normal life alongside of that. It's a problem. If you add to that the number of kids whose parents are either going through a divorce or trouble or things like that, now you have abuse, now you have not a stable environment for that. You also have kids who have maybe a learning disability or some kind of a problem that hurts them in their school situation. And if you think about it, your school situation is a work situation. Think about a job that you worked in that you couldn't quit and that you hated your boss. They told you you did a lousy job of it, and every day you had to go back there. Like, how would you feel about that if that happened day after day after day? And then, you know what, you put a lot of work in and they said, we're not going to pay you, you failed, you have to repeat a year. What in heaven's name would that feel like? So there has been shooters and there's been kids I've looked at with violence, and they have failed 1, 2, 3 times. I had a kid, he got up in a classroom and spit in the teacher's face. This is a kid who was 6'2". He actually beat a kid with an axe handle and sent him to the hospital. He held a gun on a DEA agent and went to prison, but he did name his child after me, so that's good. But he spit in this teacher's face, and I said, well, what happened, right? What happened was the teacher asked him to read. Now, he had failed 2 grades, so he's bigger than all the kids in the classroom. And the kid says, the kid didn't read, and the teacher said, will you read? I'll call him like Mark. Mark, will you read? And Mark didn't read. So he said to him like, Mark, what are you, stupid? Will you read? And he got up and walked over to the teacher and spit in his face. And so he said to me, well, we're even. He embarrassed me and I embarrassed him. And I was like, well, you see, that's not the way that works. So we ended up sending him home and all this, but you kind of get the idea, you're failing, there's no respect for you, you're falling behind, and you're just like, what can I do to keep my head above water? Now, when a lot of kids find alcohol or drugs, they're like, man, I can keep it together if I use these drugs or alcohol. Yeah. If I drink, if I use these drugs, if I do, I can have a moment of sanity in my life, and I can sleep, and I at least can have some peace, and I can go to school the next day, and I can sort of be okay. The problem is, and this is the problem, we say the drugs are bad and don't do drugs and don't do all these different things, but we're not introducing another way for them to be successful. They're out in the middle of an ocean with a life preserver, and we're saying, hey, give me that life preserver. Maybe before we take the life preserver away, we better go like, what else can we do to support them and help them in these situations? Because these are not kids who are wanting to do this. A lot of times, they're doing the best they can do, and this is what they come up with, So it's these multiple things that happen, and once that pattern of failure starts, I don't know, it just keeps going unless somebody sort of intervenes. And we're not good at the intervention. We're good in classrooms about teaching the multitude, the main group of people, We're not good when the system breaks down that well.
And people slip through the cracks. You know, like you do have, like you said, two battles going on. So drugs or alcohol is taking away one. So now, okay, I can only focus on one thing. There's only one tormenting thing going on in my life. You know, you have your external factors, but then you also have, you know, physically, you know, what's going on. So you have
That's a good point.
mind, body, and soul. So your body, you have anxiety, you have depression, you know, you have ADHD. That's a struggle. So school right there, there's battlefield number one. Number two, the external factors, the pressure from your teachers. So, you know, start smoking pot, maybe that takes away that anxiety, you know, that one thing, but then you still have to deal with, you know, that teacher. When you have something like, when you have a pattern of negative reinforcement, you know, for a kid or for a teenager, it can develop into a personality disorder. And
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because it just keeps happening, right? I
Right.
mean, what you were talking about is like this internal thing starts, and you look at you look at the amount of anxiety that we produce in our society, right? We have more anxiety like than we've ever had. We have more depression than we have ever had. And the question is like what is going on?
Yeah.
What are we doing that we're more anxious than we've ever been?
Right.
Right? Certainly we didn't try to set out to do that, but certainly that's the way sort of it's come about.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is social media. You know, just you see things and you see successful people and you see these things that really before maybe you didn't see, you know, people 21, 22 with a, you know, brand new BMW and a yacht and living a lifestyle, but on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, you see all these fraudulent profiles that these people think are real. So expectations are even larger because you're seen globally. Like, you may be okay with, I'm not the smartest guy in my town of 1,200. I'm not the smartest guy in the entire world is pretty difficult, you know?
Right.
And like, so...
That's the audience you're competing with.
Yeah.
And it's at a time when your brain development is not happening. So when you're an adolescent, your emotional brain is developing. And so that's really being revved up, right? But your logic, reasoning, executive functioning, that doesn't develop until you're 25. So you're developing this motor that can fly, right?
Yeah.
It can just go, but it has no brakes. So you're creating a society where we have lots of freedom to get on the internet, watch things, do things, go places, whatever.
Right.
And emotionally, you can fly around.
Right.
What kind of brakes, and you said this really well, what kind of brakes have you developed inside?
Yeah.
We, for whatever reason, are a culture that hasn't figured out how to calm ourselves down. And if you look at a lot of the research, when you look at brain activity, right, being able to bring your brain activity down when you're upset is one of the greatest skills.
Yeah.
You know, if something happens, I get a bad grade in a class, a girl doesn't like me, and I get upset, right? What do I say to myself? What do I do so I can go back and reset so that everything's okay?
Yeah.
When my brain is activated like that and my body is activated like that, I equate that with survival, right? So now, this is not about just this girl or this grade. It's about, I'm not going to live. This 14-year-old kid in...
They're projecting.
Yeah, this 14-year-old kid. He goes and they couldn't find him because the parents, the school called and they said he was behind in the schoolwork.
Right.
He goes missing. They get hundreds of people out looking, whatever. He's a couple 100 feet from the house. He shot and killed himself because he falls behind on his own work. And again, you're just like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But he equated, I'm falling behind my survival.
Sure.
My survival is, this is like all I have and it's folding and that's it. Well, if that's my survival, you tend to do crazy stuff
Sure.
then, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you put, if you're taught that this one thing is you, it's your personality, and you identify with it, then if that thing doesn't work, if you don't have other things to fall on when you have tough times, it's the end of the world.
Right.
So you see like people, the high school quarterback, who gets the DUI, or is, working at Blockbuster, which is closed. But, you wonder, you say that guy was gonna do it, he was gonna be the most successful. But he put everything into his identity was the football player.
Yeah.
So then
That's
when he got the injury or couldn't go pro, it was, I'm a complete failure. There wasn't levels, there wasn't that self-soothing.
I've had pro players, I've had college players, I've had high school players who have all been suicidal. And part of that is, hey, I'm a big deal and this is my identity.
Yeah.
What happens, this is one of the things, how do you create passion? You create passion by investment of time, money, and energy and priorities, right? And when I start putting a lot of eggs in this basket, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I can't, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. So my investment is in this basket. When this basket gets turned over and all those eggs break,
Yeah.
what in heaven's name do I do having invested and having tried so hard to do this thing?
Right.
Right? It's
Yeah.
almost like your GPS. There has to be a point where you recalculate
Mm-hmm.
and come up with another plan, because if you don't,
Yeah.
I don't know what you do. The thing that everything's based on and everything that I've invested in goes in this thing, and the eggs have fallen and they've cracked and they're on the ground, and I'm standing there with it's just completely messed up.
Yeah.
And then I think, you know what? That doesn't matter. Nothing matters. The Queen said it. Nothing really matters to me, right? If you
Yeah.
listen to that song, you'll see somebody who's working through this depression, through this anxiety, and comes to the conclusion, it doesn't matter what I do,
Freddie Mercury.
It doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to end up with a life that has no meaning and no purpose.
Yeah.
And we've done that to kids too. I think we've also not talked about spiritual things, we've not talked about a bigger picture, and we place so much pressure on you making meaning in your own life
Right.
that I'm not sure we're meant to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's America in general. I mean, I think the attitude is, to make something from nothing, the entrepreneur spirit. Like, what we're founded on in America is success. So people want to correlate who they are, and they emotionally correlate who they are with success. So if I don't have this type of job and this type of car and a house in the suburbs, I'm a failure. That's incredibly superficial and materialistic, but how many people just thought to themselves, yeah, I believe that, or I've thought
and
that.
if you do that, you're always going to end up frustrated and unhappy, because if you study the literature on happiness, which is kind of interesting, probably 30% of it is from the external world, the 35%. 2/3 of it is really the way that I think inside about the way things are, right? But, and we should go back to the brain development, during that period of brain development for middle school and for high school, it tends to be more this outside look. So the top time in your life for peers and peer relationship is middle school, right? I mean, that's just like you find friends, or I don't know, if you sit by, I remember talking to a kid and I was tell me what happens during the day, and he's like, well, I go to school. Who do you talk to? I don't talk to anybody. I'm like, oh my gosh. And at lunch, who do you sit with? I just sit by myself. Or sometimes I go to the library and sit by myself in the library. I'm just like, oh my gosh. You know, I mean, how do you not end up
Yeah.
depressed when you're either ostracized or worse, if you look at a lot of these violent shootings and things like that,
Yeah.
you find people who are a lot of times picked on, ostracized. In the when they've looked at abusive patterns and they've looked at the most damaging patterns come from long-term situations where somebody's put down. You would think it would be like a sexual abuse or physical abuse or something like that,
Right.
but long-term putting down of somebody,
Mhm.
you know, just rubbing them into the ground and having it happen day after day, time after time, is something that our personalities just we just can't handle.
Yeah.
So there's this, and rightfully so, anger that comes from that, upsetness, and it's like, I'm gonna get back at somebody for this particular thing.
Because it's external.
Right.
You know, so I'm gonna act, I'm going to shoot, I'm going to punch, I'm going to spit, because it's external. It's not
Yeah.
internal, you know?
And the literature, girls a lot of times act towards self, so eating disorders, cutting, some of that stuff. Although, I don't know if it's good or bad, there's higher rates of girls fighting now,
Yeah,
so that's
violence.
like, it becomes more violent.
Right.
But guys more likely to hit, punch, act out against something. And this happens as they take little kids who are frustrated and put them in situations and where they turn the TV off and try to get, and the little boys will go and hit the TV
Yeah.
or punch the TV or to try to get it back on to watch the show that they want. Sometimes the little girls are not as aggressive in that way, but these guys just kind of,
Yeah.
they want to make it go back on, so I'm going to hit, punch, or whatever.
So like going back, like you know, I've worked with adolescents, teens, but you know, I've also worked with children, you know, down to the age of 3. In the developmental stages, like early on, one of the things I kept thinking of was, I don't remember where I heard this, but they would say if a baby can't self-soothe, that they're more likely to be, I don't know if it was have issues with depression or have issues learning, but it's a flag. And in kindergarten, that's one of the things that they look at, guidance counselors and teachers, and they'll hold them back if they can't self-soothe, because, and I really think that there's people who go through and they never have learned.
Right. And
to
we were
self-soothe.
involved with an early intervention program like in Palm Beach County where they did like preschool kids and kindergarten kids. And you can see patterns of behavior going. I mean, I had a kid and he was in trouble. He was on juvenile probation and everything. I look back in his record. He was hitting kids in preschool, fighting with them, acting out on the playground. And this is his record. This is like his kindergarten record. Now I have him and he's like 15 years old. But this kid has been doing this stuff for a long time. And then we're having a meeting and his dad chases him around the table and throws his cell phone at him. And so you're like, well, not only has he had this history, but look what he has modeled. I mean, this is what his dad does in a meeting, in a controlled situation. Can you imagine what does he do at home in that kind of a situation? And so you kind of have like all this craziness on the side. So I think you're exactly right. There might be a reflection of this inside thing that's happening.
Yeah, the inability to self-soothe and the lack of emotional awareness. You know, like you said, it's magnified before they have that. Like teenagers, if you've ever worked with teenagers, there's a few emotions that they have. It's like they are shouting and so happy and high-fiving and the whole group is going crazy, or it's like anger and like yelling and pushing or punching. There's not a lot of depth there. It's like jubilee
Well,
or
and
dark.
that's the frontal lobe helps us regulate our emotions. And so I always say, like, do you have an emotion or does emotion have you?
Mm-hmm.
So here, if I have this emotion and I can regulate it, then I can have it like jubilation or excitement, whatever. But then I can put that down and go back to my work again, or I can be upset and I can
Right.
go back to my work again.
Yes.
But if you can't regulate that in some way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And here's a tipper if you want to find somebody and you're talking with somebody. One of the tips to regulation is you can look at people's pupils,
Yeah.
and if they can't regulate their emotions, their pupils will dilate very quick. There's sympathetic nervous system, which is your adrenals. Some people's just go like off the chart and they have a very difficult time bringing it down. So what happens if you look at them, you can talk to them about the weather, and their pupils are getting absolutely huge because they're having an emotional reaction not to the content of the weather, but just to the conversation with you and how they feel about it. They'll say later on, like, I felt like I just, what you were looking at me, and I just couldn't handle you looking at me. A number of kids I talk to who can't look at themselves in the mirror, or say that they're stupid, or, you know, I hate myself, I hate the way I look. I haven't looked at myself in the mirror for 5 years.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's like enormously.
That's dark.
That's so dark. And then what are you going to do to not feel that? Well, I'm going to do anything
Mm-hmm.
to not feel that bad because that's horrible, right? I mean, that's just but if you can't regulate that and there's not a part of you, for adults that are healthy, we kind of go, okay, yeah, I lost my car keys and I'm dumb sometimes, right? But I'm not a stupid person and I don't carry that voice inside my head for the rest of the day.
And I don't want to commit suicide because I can't find my keys.
I hate myself and I wish I could kill myself because I can't find my keys. But if you have that lack of emotional regulation,
Mm-hmm.
the water spills over the dam
Mm-hmm.
real quickly. Or you can think about it as a cup. It's 3/4 of the way filled. You can't handle much more in there, or it's going to spill out. And then you start, when you reach the limits, I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to hurt somebody else. I'm going to do something to relieve this pain in some way.
Yeah, and a big acting out. It's wanting attention, you know, like people cry out for help in different ways. Depends on the personality and the things that they're exposed to. But the important thing to really think about is the depth of starvation and lack of emotional connection, like that people have.
That's absolutely
like
right.
they feel that 14-year-old felt that empty, that alone, that his lack of humanity was already to the point where he wants to kill classmates, other people. Like, it was there. Like, people brush it off, and it's easy to just say, oh, he was crazy. I mean, like, you hear analysts and people say the dumbest things after a shooting, a school shooting, or an incident occurs, and you know they're trying to look at why. And sure, yeah, the parents, of course, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Like, okay, there could be abuse from the parents, or mom or dad wasn't around. Yes, those are absolutely factors in it, but then there's also the environmental factors, you know, that you stated. And
and there's sometimes when parents do nothing wrong. I mean, in some ways, if your parents are good, it makes you feel worse, right? Because you say to yourself, how come I can't do what my parents have done? They seem to be pretty successful with life, and they seem pretty successful with stuff. And then you say, well,
Yeah.
Something must be wrong with me then, because how come I can't do it the way that
Yeah.
that everybody else in the world seems to do it, and my parents seem to do it. And then if you're successful as a parent, unfortunately, a lot of times you just tell kids to be successful the way that you were. And if I had to say one thing to parents, it would be, take the time to realize the God-given gifts and ability that the child has, because they may be very different from the gifts that you have. And they may be very different in terms of the way they need to hear and understand love, and the way that love needs to be communicated.